At 6:12 the morning after my niece called me her only real mother on live television, my phone showed 47 missed calls. Most were from reporters, relatives who had ignored us for 5 years, and my employer's legal department. The last voicemail came from my sister. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Tell the board Emily chose to leave. Tell them the documentary turned one bad argument into abandonment. Do that, and I'll sign the adoption papers by Friday." I played the message twice. For 5 years, Emily had slept with a suitcase under her bed because Rebecca would not take her home and would not let her become mine. Every court letter made that child pack again. Every birthday card Rebecca sent before a hearing became proof that she had maintained contact. Every missed payment, and every night I sat outside Emily's room had disappeared beneath one phrase Rebecca kept repeating: voluntary therapeutic separation. Now she was offering me the one thing I had begged for, the one thing Emily was terrified we would never receive: a permanent home. All I had to do was help her mother rewrite the night she walked away. I looked through the doorway of Emily's room. She was still asleep in the dress she had worn on stage. The trophy rested on the floor beside her bed. Her old blue suitcase was underneath it, packed as always. Even after standing before millions of people and calling me Mom, she still did not believe the law would let her stay. I pressed record on a new voicemail, then stopped. I was done having conversations Rebecca could later rename. I called my attorney instead. "From this moment forward," I said, "every offer from my sister goes in writing." I did not know it yet, but Rebecca was about to give us the first honest document she had created in 5 years. To understand why, you need to know what she said to her 12-year-old daughter the night she decided her new family would be more complete without her. "Before I take you back, I hope you are doing well, wherever you are listening from. Stay with me, and please subscribe to the channel so you will not miss the rest of Emily's story." 5 years earlier, my phone rang while I was sorting production schedules at my kitchen table. Emily's name appeared on the screen, but when I answered, I heard only wind and the distant scrape of tires on gravel. "Aunt Laura," she whispered, "can you come get me?" I stood so quickly that my chair struck the wall. Emily never called without texting first. At 12, she had already learned to make herself small inside other people's lives. "Where are you?" "At Mom's, by the driveway." A woman shouted behind her. I recognized Rebecca's voice, sharp with the controlled anger she used when she wanted everyone else to seem unreasonable. "Emily, get back inside. We are not doing this again." I grabbed my keys. "Are you hurt?" "No." Emily paused. "I just need somewhere to go." Rebecca had planned what she called a family completion weekend. Grant's parents were visiting, and a photographer had arranged everyone in white shirts for a portrait over the fireplace. Emily had been told to stand beside Grant and say on camera that he was the father who had finally completed their family. She refused because Daniel rarely called and had built a new life in another state, but Emily would not pretend he had never existed or call Grant her father for a cleaner photograph. When I reached the house, Emily was standing beside a blue suitcase at the edge of the front walk. She wore only a thin sweater despite the cold. The front door was open. Rebecca stood inside with Grant and his children behind her. I got out of the car and moved toward Emily. "Why is her suitcase outside?" Rebecca folded her arms. "Because she has spent the entire weekend punishing everyone. She insults Grant, upsets the children, and refuses to let this family move forward." "I said I didn't want to call him Dad," Emily said quietly. Grant stepped closer to the doorway. "This house needs peace, Laura. Every celebration turns into a fight because she refuses to accept reality." Emily looked at her mother. "I didn't ask you to stop loving them. I only asked you not to make me lie." Something in Rebecca's face hardened. Grant's parents were watching from the living room, and the photographer had lowered his camera. Their judgment mattered more to her than the child standing in the cold. "I wish you had never been part of my life," Rebecca said. "Your father has his new family, and I finally have mine. Why can't you understand that neither of us has room for you anymore? For a moment, even Grant looked startled. I stared at my sister. Do you understand what you just said to your daughter? Rebecca's eyes flicked toward the people behind her. Do not twist this. She has been angry since the divorce. She sabotages every good thing because she cannot stand seeing anyone happy. She is 12. She is old enough to know exactly what she is doing. I asked where Daniel was and whether he had agreed to take Emily. Rebecca gave a bitter laugh. His wife said she will not bring this drama around their little children. He agrees she needs space to calm down. Emily lowered her head. That was the moment I understood she had not called me first. She had already been rejected twice. I took her suitcase and put it in my trunk. Rebecca did not follow us. She did not hug Emily, ask when she would return, or even bring out a coat. On the drive home, I kept expecting my phone to ring. I told myself Rebecca would cool down, remember what she had said, and call before we reached my street. Emily sat rigidly beside me, with both hands folded in her lap. I'm sorry, she said. For what? I asked. For making you come. I won't stay long. I can sleep on the couch, and I won't need much food. I pulled over and turned off the engine. You will not apologize for needing somewhere safe. She nodded without looking at me. She had the expression of a child agreeing because disagreement might cost her the seat she occupied. At home, I carried her suitcase into the spare bedroom. I cleared half the closet and showed her the empty drawers. You can put your things anywhere you like. I'll leave them packed, she said. It will be easier when Mom calls. I believed Rebecca would call too. That belief lasted until nearly 2 a.m. A soft sound woke me. Emily's bedroom door was closed, but I heard her breathing on the other side, too fast and uneven. I sat on the hallway floor rather than opening it. I'm right here, I said. After a long silence, she asked, if she changes her mind, do I have to go back? I wanted to promise that no one would send her back, but I was only her aunt. I had no document saying she could remain with me. I don't know what a court might decide, I said, but I promise you will never face it alone. Her breathing slowly settled. I stayed outside the door until she slept, then left the hallway light on. The next morning, Rebecca finally contacted me. She did not ask whether Emily had slept or whether she had cried. She sent a document and told me to sign it immediately so I could handle school pickup and basic medical care. The document called me a temporary caregiver, then gave me a sentence that made my hands go cold. Emily Brooks voluntarily requested temporary placement with her maternal aunt, while the family completes a therapeutic separation period. Rebecca had taken the worst words she had ever spoken and turned them into Emily's decision. I read the sentence again, then looked toward the spare room. The suitcase remained closed beside the bed. Emily was sitting on the carpet, wearing yesterday's sweater, waiting for someone to decide what happened to her next. I deleted the signature field and sent Rebecca one response. Emily did not volunteer to leave. I will not sign a lie. Then I called a family law office and asked how to seek emergency kinship guardianship. The attorney listened, took notes, and finally asked whether Rebecca was likely to contest. Before I could answer, a message appeared on my screen. If you take me to court, I will tell them exactly why a lonely woman without children was so eager to take mine. Rebecca's message stayed on my screen while the attorney waited for my answer. Yes, I said. She will contest. By noon, I had learned how little being the adult who brought Emily home actually allowed me to do. The school would not change her address without proof of authority. The counseling office would not schedule her without a parent's consent. My insurance company said I could not add her until a court recognized me as her guardian. Even the pediatrician, who had treated Emily for years, would only discuss emergencies. Rebecca had sent me enough paper to carry responsibility, but not enough to make decisions. I spent the next week moving between my office, Emily's school, the courthouse, and a family law clinic. I used vacation days I had been saving for a trip with Michael and began taking production calls from my car. At North Star, I told my supervisor there was a family emergency. I did not tell him that the emergency had arrived with one suitcase and no date for leaving. Emily tried to make herself useful. She washed dishes before I asked, folded towels into perfect squares, and ate whatever I served without complaint. If I bought cereal she liked, she chose the cheaper one the next time. When I told her she could invite a friend over, she said she did not want to create extra work. Every small act made me more uneasy. She was not settling in. She was auditioning for the right to stay. Michael came over that first Saturday with fresh sheets, a desk lamp, and 2 bags of groceries. He assembled a narrow bookshelf while Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, pretending to read the instructions. "You know this piece is upside down," she said. Michael looked at the shelf, then at me. "I was testing you both." Emily smiled for the first time since she arrived. For a while, I let myself believe we could absorb the disruption and keep moving. Michael and I had been together for almost 3 years. We had talked about marriage, though neither of us was in a hurry. He was kind to Emily, and she liked him. I thought kindness would be enough until Rebecca came to her senses. But Rebecca did not come. She sent messages asking whether Emily had calmed down. She wanted photographs of her room and confirmation that she was attending school. When I asked when she planned to see her daughter, Rebecca said the therapist she had spoken to recommended space. There was no therapist name. Daniel answered one of my 4 calls. He said his wife was uncomfortable having Emily stay because their youngest child had anxiety. "She is your daughter," I said. "I know that." "Then come get her." He was quiet for so long that I checked whether the call had dropped. "Laura, she is better with you right now." Neither parent wanted Emily, but both wanted me to describe that choice as temporary. The strain reached Michael slowly. He stopped leaving clothes at my house because Emily needed the closet in the spare room. We canceled dinners because I had court paperwork or school meetings. When the counseling center finally agreed to place Emily on a waiting list, Michael drove us there, then sat outside in the car. On the way home, Emily fell asleep in the back seat. Michael waited until we were parked before speaking. "How long is this going to last?" "I don't know. That is what you said 3 weeks ago." "Because no one will give me an answer." He looked toward the house. "We had plans, Laura." "I know. I wanted a life with you. I never agreed to raise your sister's child." The words hurt because he did not say them cruelly. He said them like a man reading the terms of a contract he had never signed. "Neither did she," I said. Michael rubbed both hands over his face. "There are people trained for this. Social services could find a temporary placement while your sister sorts herself out." I looked at Emily through the rear-view mirror. Her head rested against the window, and one hand gripped the strap of her backpack even in sleep. "She already has a temporary placement." "That is not what I mean." "I know. Michael asked me to think about it." I told him I already had. He carried his overnight bag from my bedroom to his car that evening. There was no shouting and no final accusation. He kissed my forehead, told me he hoped I knew what I was giving up, and left. I stood in the doorway until his taillights disappeared. Then I went inside and found Emily sitting at the kitchen table. "I can go somewhere else," she said. The speed of her offer frightened me. "This had nothing to do with you." "It always has something to do with me." I sat across from her. I wanted to tell her Michael was wrong, and I had no regrets. Neither statement was fully true. He was not wrong to want the future we had planned, and I was grieving it. What I could say was simpler. "You are not going anywhere tonight." Emily looked down at her hands. "What about tomorrow?" That was the question neither love nor good intentions could answer. The emergency hearing took place 11 days after Rebecca put the suitcase outside. She arrived carrying a gift bag and a thick folder. Inside were birthday photographs, old report cards, school certificates, and family vacation pictures from before the divorce. She looked like a mother prepared to prove devotion. Rebecca told the judge that Emily had become increasingly hostile after the remarriage. She said Emily had asked for space, that I had misunderstood one emotional argument, and that she remained fully committed to reunification. When the judge asked why Emily could not return home immediately, Rebecca lowered her voice. "We need professional support before bringing her back into a house with younger children." Grant sat behind her and nodded. Daniel appeared on a video screen from his office. He said Emily had always enjoyed the quiet at my house and had told him she preferred staying with me for a while. The judge asked whether he was willing to have Emily live with him. Daniel shifted in his chair. "My current household is not prepared for that transition." I had to press my nails into my palm to keep from speaking. Maria Alvarez, the court-appointed advocate, met Emily in a smaller room during a recess. I was allowed to sit near the door, but Maria directed every question to her. "Where are your clothes right now?" Maria asked. "In my suitcase." "All of them?" Emily glanced at me before answering. "Most of them." "Why haven't you unpacked?" Her fingers tightened around the sleeves of her sweater. "The judge might need me ready." Maria looked at me then, and I saw the question in her face. What had I told this child about her future? I explained that I had promised not to lie. I said Rebecca was overwhelmed, probably ashamed, and needed time to understand what she had done. Emily's eyes moved away from me. I realized too late that she had heard me defend the person who left her. The judge granted me temporary kinship guardianship. I could enroll Emily in school, authorize counseling and routine medical care, and access the records I needed. Rebecca and Daniel were ordered to maintain contact, participate in counseling, and contribute support. The arrangement would be reviewed regularly. Rebecca left the courtroom furious that I had been given authority, but almost relieved when her attorney reminded her that her parental rights remained intact. That night, I was putting away groceries when Emily opened the refrigerator. "Mom, do we have any more milk?" She froze with the door still open. "I mean Aunt Laura." I thought the kindest thing was to remove the pressure. "You never have to call me that. Aunt Laura is fine." She nodded and took out the milk. Later, I passed her room and saw that the closet door was open. One of the 2 shirts she had finally hung there was gone. I found it folded inside the blue suitcase. The first review schedule arrived the next day. Every 90 days, the court could reconsider where Emily lived. She sat at the kitchen table with a red pen and circled every date. For the next 15 months, our lives were measured in 90-day intervals. Emily kept the review dates circled in red on the calendar beside the refrigerator. Between them, she slowly began to live like a child instead of a guest. As each hearing approached, she became careful again. The first thing she asked me to teach her was how to braid her hair. Rebecca had always done it before school, and Emily was tired of wearing a ponytail every day. I watched 3 tutorials the night before and told her I understood the technique. 20 minutes later, one side of the braid was thick, the other was barely holding together, and a section near her ear pointed straight out. Emily studied herself in the mirror. "It looks confident," I said. "It looks injured." We laughed until I had to start over. The second attempt was not much better, but she wore it to school anyway. Friday nights became ours. I made grilled cheese sandwiches. Emily chose an old movie, and we argued over whether black and white films counted as entertainment or punishment. She always complained, then stayed awake until the end and asked questions about the actors. There were rules, too. Homework came before her phone. Dishes went into the dishwasher, not beside it. When she stayed online past midnight and tried to hide an unfinished science assignment, I took her phone for 2 days. "You are not my mother," she shouted. The words hit both of us. Emily's face changed immediately. "I didn't mean that." I wanted to tell her she was right. The court documents called me guardian, not mother. Instead, I pointed to the chair across from me. "You are allowed to be angry," I said. "You are still finishing the assignment." She glared at me for another 10 seconds, then sat down. The next evening, she placed the completed project on the table and quietly asked for help fixing her hair. Neither of us apologized with a speech. We repaired things by staying in the room. That was how our life grew. Not through one grand promise, but through hundreds of ordinary decisions. I began saying our house without noticing. The first time Emily noticed, she looked toward me but said nothing. At North Star, my coworkers started treating me like a single mother. At first, they were considerate. Then the invitations gradually stopped. "We didn't ask you to the concert," one producer told me, "because you probably couldn't find a sitter." Emily was 13 by then and did not need a sitter, but I let it go. A friend introduced me to a widower named Paul. We had coffee twice. On the third evening, he asked how long Emily would be living with me. "As long as she needs to," I said. His expression changed. He paid for his coffee and did not call again. My mother was less subtle. "You are 43, Eleanor said one Sunday while Emily was in the next room. "These are not years you get back. Rebecca made a terrible mistake, but you cannot sacrifice the rest of your life to prove a point." "I am not proving a point. You have always wanted a family. Maybe having Emily there makes you feel like you finally have one." I lowered my voice. "She can hear you." Mom glanced toward the doorway and whispered, "Rebecca says, you have become too attached." Rebecca had begun telling relatives that I needed someone to call me mother. In her version, she had allowed Emily to stay with me because I was lonely. Then I had made the arrangement permanent. I wanted to defend myself, but I refused to do it where Emily might hear. She had already learned to believe every lost opportunity was her fault. The support payments arrived irregularly. Daniel missed entire months and responded to reminders by saying his younger children had expenses too. Rebecca sent smaller amounts, usually a few days before court. Her calls followed the same pattern. For weeks, she might not contact Emily at all. Then, shortly before a review, she would request a video call and send a card or gift. During those calls, she asked about grades, awards, and school photographs. "Did you make the honor roll again?" "Yes." "Did Aunt Laura take a picture?" "I think so." "Send it to me, and tell Maria, you still have a room here." Emily would glance at me. "Do I?" Rebecca's smile would tighten. "Of course you do. This will always be your home." She never asked what book Emily was reading, who she ate lunch with, or why she still woke whenever a car stopped outside after dark. 3 weeks before the fourth review hearing, Emily had a concert at school. I had spent the previous night at North Star after a live broadcast lost its satellite feed. I arrived at the auditorium wearing the same blouse, with coffee on one sleeve and no feeling left in my feet. Emily stood on stage with the choir, scanning the audience until she found me. The moment she did, her shoulders dropped. I nearly slept through the second song, but I was there. Afterward, she ran toward me, then slowed before reaching my arms, as though she still needed permission. I hugged her anyway. When we got home, we made Rebecca's chicken casserole. Emily remembered the recipe differently, so we added too much cheese and crushed potato chips over the top. "Mom never used chips," she said. "Then this is our version." Emily smiled at the word "our." For the first time, she unpacked almost everything. Sweaters filled 2 shelves. Her dresses hung beside the jackets I had moved to my bedroom. She placed books on the windowsill and taped the concert program above her desk. I believed we had crossed some invisible line. Then, the court reminder arrived. That evening, I opened Emily's door to ask whether she wanted dessert. The books were gone from the windowsill. The dresses had disappeared from the closet. The concert program remained on the wall, but the blue suitcase sat open on the bed, packed so tightly she had to kneel on it to close the zipper. "What are you doing?" She kept pressing down on the lid. "The hearing is Thursday." "That does not mean you are leaving. It means I could." "Rebecca has canceled the last 3 visits. She asked for more time this morning." I had seen the filing. Rebecca wanted expanded visitation and claimed she was ready to rebuild their relationship. She had requested the same thing before, then canceled because Grant's parents visited, because his daughter had a tournament, and because their family had booked a weekend at a lake. Maria recorded every cancellation. Rebecca called them unavoidable scheduling conflicts. I sat beside the suitcase. "Your mother may still change," I said. "She may finally understand what she has done. She is still your mother." Emily stopped pulling the zipper. "Then what does that make you?" I opened my mouth, but no answer came. Her eyes filled, not with anger but with something worse. "I know what the court calls you," she said. "I asked what I call you." I thought of the night she accidentally said Mom and how quickly I had corrected her. I had believed I was protecting her from choosing sides. I had never considered that I was making her stand alone between them. "I don't know," I admitted. Emily nodded as though that was the answer she expected. She pushed the suitcase beneath the bed. At Thursday's hearing, Rebecca arrived asking for alternating weekends. She described herself as patient, committed, and ready to rebuild trust. The judge approved a gradual visitation schedule. Rebecca canceled the first weekend because Grant's family had already made plans. She canceled the second because his children did not feel prepared. At the next hearing, her attorney called those cancellations evidence that Rebecca was proceeding carefully for Emily's emotional safety. When we left the courtroom, Emily walked ahead with Maria. Rebecca caught my arm near the elevator. "You are enjoying this," she said. "Enjoying what?" "Everyone looking at you like the devoted mother. You get the school concerts, the photographs, the grateful child. I get blamed for giving her space. You asked for visits and did not show up." Rebecca leaned closer. "You can play mother in your house, but I will never sign away the one thing that proves she is mine." The elevator doors opened behind me, but I did not move. Until that moment, I had believed Rebecca's pride prevented her from admitting she had failed. I had believed some part of her still intended to bring Emily home. Now I understood. Rebecca did not want her daughter back. She wanted to keep the power to take her away. The applause from Rebecca's speech followed me home. For several days, I kept hearing it whenever I looked at Emily's notes. Strangers had praised my sister for creating the distance that supposedly healed her daughter. They did not know that the distance had nightmares, court dates, unpaid bills, and a suitcase that never stayed empty for long. By the beginning of Emily's 4th year with me, the wall above her desk had become a map of the documentary she wanted to make. Photographs, interview questions, handwritten captions, and strips of colored paper connected one story to another. She had spoken with a grandmother raising 2 boys after their mother disappeared into addiction. She found an older brother who had become his sister's guardian at 23. A school secretary introduced her to an aunt who had spent months trying to obtain permission for a child's dental surgery because every form demanded a parent's signature. Emily did not want the film to be about heroic rescues. She wanted it to be about the things no one applauded. A woman learning which office could authorize a school lunch account. A grandfather sitting through a dance recital after working all night. A child sleeping beside a packed bag because no adult would promise where she would live next month. I agreed to help, but only after we sat at the kitchen table and wrote down rules. "The story belongs to you," I told her. "Not to me, not to North Star, and not to your mother. But if other people appear, their stories still belong to them." Emily wrote that in her notebook. Everyone gives informed consent. No private court documents go on camera unless an attorney says they can. No hidden recordings. No humiliating anyone just because we are angry. "I am not angry at everyone," she said. "I know. I am mostly angry at one person. That is why we need the rules." She gave me a tired smile, but she agreed. I also insisted that an independent attorney review the film before it went anywhere public. Emily complained that adults always used procedure to slow down the truth. "Sometimes they do," I said. "Sometimes procedure is how we prove we did not become the thing we are fighting." The documentary grew slowly. Emily filmed kitchens, school parking lots, medicine cabinets, permission forms, and half-finished bedrooms. She asked caregivers what they had given up, but she also asked what they had gained. One grandmother laughed while describing how she had learned to use a gaming console because her grandson refused to talk during therapy but would tell her everything while they played. An aunt admitted that she once ruined an entire load of school uniforms by washing a red sock with them. The film contained fear, but it also contained ordinary joy. Emily included me reluctantly. I refused a formal interview because I did not want the documentary to become a tribute to me. She compromised by filming only what happened around the house. My hands packing her lunch, my shoes outside a school auditorium, the back of my head while I argued with an insurance representative, the hallway light, the half-empty closet. One evening, she showed me a rough sequence about the night Rebecca left her outside. The screen remained black, while Emily's voice repeated the words her mother had said. "I wish you had never been part of my life. Your father has his new family, and I finally have mine." Hearing the sentence in Emily's voice was different from remembering Rebecca say it. On the night itself, I had been too angry to absorb every word. Now I heard what a 12-year-old had carried away from that doorway. When the clip ended, I asked Emily whether she might soften it. She closed the laptop. Why? Because there were other people there. Because memory can change under stress. Because your mother will say the film is attacking her. She said it. I know. Then why do I have to make it easier for her to hear? I searched for an answer that did not sound like fear. We have to be careful. Emily pushed her chair back. You have been careful for 4 years. That is not fair. You told the court she was overwhelmed. You told Grandma not to choose sides. You kept saying she might change. I was trying to protect you. You keep protecting the woman who left. Who is protecting the girl she left behind? The question silenced me. I had spent years believing restraint made me different from Rebecca. I had not understood that every softened phrase required Emily to surrender another piece of what happened. I am sorry, I said. Use the truth as you remember it. We will label what comes from memory and what the records prove, but I will not ask you to make abandonment sound kinder. Emily looked at me for a long time before reopening the laptop. That night, she restored the sentence. Several months later, North Star announced a national social impact documentary grant. The winning project would receive $950,000 for production completion, educational distribution, community screenings, and the creation of a youth storytelling lab. Emily read the announcement twice. You cannot submit, I said before she asked. Her face fell. Because you work there? Because I work there, and you live with me. The following morning, I requested a meeting with North Star's compliance director. I disclosed that Emily was my niece and legal ward, that I had appeared in her footage, and that I had given limited technical advice. I withdrew from every part of the process. I would not review submissions, attend selection meetings, discuss budgets, speak to judges, or read legal evaluations. North Star transferred Emily's application to an outside panel that did not report to my department. When I explained the conditions, Emily asked whether I thought she could win without me. I think the only way your film can win honestly is without me. She submitted it. Weeks passed without news. I refused to ask anyone at work about the competition. Emily pretended she did not care, though she checked her email before breakfast, after school, and once more before bed. When the notice finally arrived, she ran into the kitchen holding her laptop. The woman who stayed had reached the semi-final round. She hugged me so quickly that my coffee spilled across the counter. For one evening, we allowed ourselves to celebrate. We ordered pizza, watched the hallway light again, and argued over whether the first crooked braid deserved a place in the final cut. The letter from Rebecca's attorney arrived 2 days later. It accused me of manipulating a vulnerable minor, alienating Emily from her biological mother, exploiting private family conflict, and using my position at North Star to obtain professional benefit. It demanded that the documentary be withdrawn immediately. A second filing reached my attorney that afternoon. Rebecca had asked the family court to stop the film's release and order Emily to undergo an independent evaluation outside my home. She claimed Emily could not express her true wishes while living under my influence. I found Emily in her room before dinner. Every dress had been removed from the closet. Her books were stacked beside the bed, and the blue suitcase lay open across the blanket. "You do not need to pack. She says I have to be evaluated somewhere else." She asked the court. The court has not decided. What if they believe her? I sat beside the suitcase. Emily's hands were shaking as she folded a sweatshirt that was already folded. Could the film make them send me back? I wanted to say no. I wanted to promise that 4 years of school records, counseling notes, missed visits, and ordinary life would matter more than Rebecca's accusation. But I had promised Emily I would not make safety from words I could not guarantee. "I don't know what the court will do," I said, "but I will never ask you to lie so I can keep you. If we become a family on paper, it will be because the truth survived." She pressed both palms against the clothes inside the suitcase. My phone rang before she could answer. North Star's compliance director told me the outside panel had frozen Emily's submission, pending an integrity review. Because Rebecca's allegations involved my employment, I was being placed on temporary administrative leave. I looked at the company identification card still clipped to my belt, then at the adoption petition on Emily's desk. For the first time, protecting her could cost me both the career I had spent 20 years building and the legal right to become her mother. Administrative leave sounded temporary when the compliance director said it. At home, it felt like a verdict. My company identification card lay inside a kitchen drawer. Emily's documentary remained frozen. Rebecca's motion asking for an evaluation outside my home was still before the family court. Every part of our life that had once seemed separate had been pulled into the same accusation. I had used my job to reward a child I had manipulated. Emily had been taught to hate her mother. The night outside Rebecca's house had been one bad argument transformed into abandonment. For 4 years, I had answered those claims cautiously. I had corrected facts without naming what Rebecca had done. I told myself restraint would make me credible. Now restraint had become the space where her lie kept growing. North Star's independent reviewers asked for a complete account of how Emily's film had been developed. My attorney arranged for the materials to go through proper channels, so nothing from the guardianship case was released publicly. At the same time, New Beginnings Family Alliance opened an ethics review after learning that Rebecca's training materials might include a minor whose family case was still active. The first records arrived on a Monday morning. I expected pages of policies and legal language. Instead, there were 3 things I could understand immediately. A set of training slides, Rebecca's grant application, and keynote transcript. A timeline of the contact she claimed to have maintained with Emily. The first slide showed a diagram titled Voluntary Therapeutic Separation as a Path to Family Integration. Beneath it was a case identified only as Family H. The adolescent daughter had resisted remarriage. She had requested temporary placement with a maternal relative. Her mother had preserved connection while creating healthy boundaries. Over time, the child's grades improved. Family conflict declined, and she discovered an interest in filmmaking. I sat at the kitchen table with the pages spread in front of me. The wording was no longer merely similar. It was Emily. Rebecca's grant application removed any doubt. She had personally certified that the case came from her direct family experience and that the results had been verified. She described herself as the parent who recognized that conventional reunification would intensify conflict. She claimed that she had maintained meaningful contact through regular calls, birthday recognition, academic involvement, and planned visitation. Then she listed Emily's achievements. Honor Roll, Regional Documentary Prize, improved attendance, increased emotional regulation. The school photograph I had sent after Emily's first film award appeared in an appendix. The image had been cropped so no one could see my hand resting on Emily's shoulder. I remembered Rebecca asking for that picture. I had believed that some part of her wanted to see how proud her daughter looked. She had not wanted the memory. She had wanted evidence. Emily came into the kitchen carrying 2 mugs of tea. She set one beside me, then saw the photograph. What is that doing there? I turned the application so she could read it. She remained standing, while her eyes moved down the page. Her face did not change until she reached the paragraph describing her progress as the result of Rebecca's planned intervention. She said my grades improved because she created healthy boundaries. I nodded. She missed the parent conference where they told you I might fail math. I know. She canceled the weekend before my first film screening. I know. Emily looked at the contact timeline. The dates formed a pattern I should have recognized long before. Cards arrived shortly before court reviews. Calls occurred before reports were due. Requests for photographs followed awards and school events. Long periods of silence disappeared because Rebecca had reduced parenthood to points on a calendar. Emily placed both hands on the table. She turned the years she missed into evidence that she helped me. There was nothing I could say to make that discovery smaller. I thought of every time I had sent Rebecca a report card because I believed a mother deserved to know. Every time I encouraged Emily to answer a call because I did not want her accused of refusing contact. Every time I described Rebecca as overwhelmed instead of absent. I had not created the lie, but I had protected the conditions that allowed it to survive. The reviewers requested documentation responding to Rebecca's claims. For the first time, I did not begin by asking how much truth the family could tolerate. I gave them the original caregiver authorization I had refused to sign. I provided Rebecca's messages stating that Emily could not return to her home. My attorney submitted the canceled visitation records, the support payment history, and the dates of Rebecca's cards and calls, compared with the court review schedule. Emily supplied the original timestamps from her footage. The clips showed the suitcase under the bed, months after Rebecca claimed reunification was progressing. They showed the hallway light and the half-empty closet, long before the grant competition existed. None of it went to reporters. None of it appeared online. It went to the people responsible for deciding whether Rebecca's claims were true. Rebecca called our mother before she called me. Eleanor arrived at my house that evening with Frank. Emily was upstairs working with her editor, but I knew sound carried through the vents. Mom did not sit down. Rebecca says you sent her private employment files to your company. Her organization provided them during its ethics review. You know what I mean. You are trying to destroy her career. I am responding to accusations she made against Emily and me. Frank removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. There has to be a way to handle this privately. She used Emily in speeches and grant applications. She did not use her name. She used her life. Mom lowered her voice. Rebecca has a husband and children who depend on her. Think about what happens to them if she loses everything. I stared at her. For years, every decision had been measured by what it might cost Rebecca, Grant, or Grant's children. No one had asked what silence cost the child upstairs. Private is where this lie survived, I said. Mom flinched. You are choosing strangers over your own sister. No. I am finally choosing the person she left behind. Frank looked toward the staircase. He seemed to understand that Emily could hear us, but he still asked whether I could withdraw the documentary and settle the guardianship without further damage. There is no settlement that makes a lie become true, I said. They left without saying goodbye. Emily came downstairs several minutes later. She had heard enough. If I withdraw the film, can you go back to work? The review is already happening. But it would help. It might. And Mom might stop fighting the adoption. She might. Emily wrapped both arms around herself. Then I should withdraw it. I stood and moved closer, but she stepped back. I made this worse, she said. You lost Michael because I stayed. Now you could lose your job because I made a film. You did not make Rebecca file false reports. I gave her something to attack. No, you gave yourself a voice. Emily looked toward the drawer where I had placed my work badge. I don't need the grant. This is not about the grant. I don't need everyone to know. You needed me to know. I knew, and I still kept softening the words. She shook her head. You believed me. I believed you privately. The difference hurt me as soon as I said it. I had sat outside her door, attended every hearing, and built a home around her. But when the truth threatened my family, I had repeatedly asked her to wait for everyone else to become comfortable. I should have called what happened abandonment the first night, I said. I am sorry I made you wait 5 years to hear me say it. Emily covered her mouth with one hand. Your mother abandoned you, I continued. Your father abandoned you too. You did not cause it. You did not volunteer for it. And you do not have to withdraw the truth to protect me from the consequences of standing beside you. Her shoulders began to shake. When I opened my arms this time, she stepped into them. We stayed that way until the phone rang. The independent panel had completed its preliminary integrity review. The evidence showed that I had disclosed my relationship, recused myself, and had no involvement in judging. Emily's documentary was cleared to continue, subject to final verification. The panel had selected the final 3 projects. The Woman Who Stayed was one of them. For several seconds, neither Emily nor I spoke. Relief came first, followed quickly by the knowledge that Rebecca would not accept defeat quietly. We learned what she planned the next morning. A national reporter contacted North Star requesting comment about the competition. Rebecca had promised him a live statement from what she called the mother whose daughter was stolen. The reporter's request reached North Star before breakfast. By noon, clips from Rebecca's first interview were circulating online. She never said Emily's name, but she did not need to. She described a vulnerable girl who had been isolated from her mother by a relative with professional influence. She said family reconciliation had been sabotaged, private pain had been turned into entertainment, and one terrible argument was being exaggerated into abandonment. She spoke slowly, with the careful sorrow of someone determined to look wounded rather than angry. I watched only once. Emily stood behind me at the kitchen counter, reading comments over my shoulder until I closed the laptop. You don't have to protect me from seeing it, she said. I'm not protecting you. I'm protecting our dishes. She looked at the mug in my hand. You were going to throw that? I was considering it. That earned a brief smile, but it faded when her phone lit up again. Students from school had begun sharing the interview. Some believed Rebecca. Others searched for Emily's name and posted old photographs from family accounts. North Star released a short statement confirming that the competition had been independently administered and that I had no role in selection or judging. The statement did not identify Emily or discuss the guardianship case. Rebecca treated the restraint as proof that the company had something to hide. 2 days later, my parents asked us to come to their house. Emily did not want to go, but Eleanor said the family needed one private conversation before the award ceremony. That phrase made me uneasy. The family had used privacy for years whenever they wanted Emily to absorb pain without embarrassing anyone else. We went because Emily said she was tired of people speaking about her in rooms she had not entered. Frank sat in his usual chair. Eleanor had placed a tray of untouched cookies on the coffee table. Rebecca was not there, but her presence filled the room. Mom began carefully. No one is asking you to lie. Emily sat beside me with both hands folded in her lap. What are you asking me to do? Think about how the film will affect your mother. Emily's shoulders stiffened. Eleanor continued. Rebecca could lose her career. Grant's children will be humiliated at school. Your grandparents will have to answer questions from people we have known for 30 years. Frank looked at me. The documentary can still screen without making the family conflict the center of it. The film is about children displaced by family conflict, I said. It can be about other families. Emily finally looked up. Why do I always have to become another family? Mom reached toward her, then stopped. We are only asking you not to humiliate Rebecca publicly. Emily's voice remained quiet. She made it public when she made me a case study. Neither of them answered. Frank removed his glasses and stared at the floor. Eleanor began saying that Rebecca had believed she was helping people, but Emily stood before she could finish. She used my grades, my film, and photographs Aunt Laura sent because she thought my mother cared. She told strangers I chose to leave so they would applaud her. I am not the person making this public. Mom's face crumpled. You are still her daughter. Emily looked at me before answering. That has never stopped her from treating me like something she could put away. We left without touching the cookies. The next court conference took place 3 days later. Rebecca's attorney submitted an affidavit from Daniel supporting her claim that Emily had voluntarily chosen to live with me. Daniel appeared by video again. His hair was grayer, but his explanation had not changed. He said Emily preferred my quiet home and had needed distance from Rebecca's remarriage. Maria leaned forward. When did Emily tell you she wanted to live permanently with Laura? Daniel hesitated. It was understood. That was not my question. He looked down at something beside his computer. Maria asked when he had last spoken privately with Emily about where she wanted to live. He could not remember. The silence lasted long enough that even Rebecca's attorney stopped taking notes. Daniel finally said he had relied on what Rebecca told him because she had managed most of Emily's care after the divorce. Maria asked why, if he believed Emily needed to leave Rebecca's home, he had not offered his own. His face tightened. My current household was not equipped for that transition. Emily sat beside me without moving. I felt her fingers close around mine beneath the table. Daniel's affidavit had been meant to strengthen Rebecca's story. Instead, it proved that neither parent had ever asked what Emily wanted. One had written the lie. The other had signed it because the lie required nothing from him. After the conference, Rebecca stopped me outside the courthouse. Grant waited several feet behind her. He did not greet Emily. Withdraw the film before the ceremony, Rebecca said. I will stop contesting the adoption. My heart struck hard against my ribs. Emily turned toward her. Rebecca looked only at me. We can end this without destroying everyone, she continued. You get the role you have wanted, and I get to protect the family I still have. You mean the family that does not include her? Rebecca's jaw tightened. I mean the children who should not suffer because Emily is angry. Emily stepped closer. I am one of your children. Rebecca's expression shifted for an instant, but not enough. This is between your aunt and me. No, I said. That is the problem. You keep negotiating around her as if she is the evidence instead of the person. Rebecca lowered her voice. Take the offer, Laura. Send anything you want considered through my attorney. Her eyes narrowed. You always need to make everything official. Only the things you later deny saying. She moved nearer. Then do not blame me when the judge sees what you have done to my daughter. I wanted to answer, but Emily pulled gently on my hand. We walked away. In the parking garage, she stopped beside my car. If I withdraw the film, she stops fighting. That is what she says. You could adopt me. Maybe. You could go back to work without people wondering whether you helped me win. Grandma and Grandpa would stop blaming you. You would not have lost Michael for nothing. The last sentence revealed how long she had been carrying my losses as debts. Look at me, I said. She did. You did not take Michael from me. You did not take my old life from me. I made choices. Because of me. For you. There is a difference. Her eyes filled. I was not supposed to need this much. No child should have to calculate how much care she is allowed to need. You gave up everything. That is not true. I stepped closer. You did not take my life away. You showed me which life was mine. Emily pressed her lips together, trying not to cry. I told her I had lost a future I once imagined, but I had not lost my chance to have a family. I had found my family in a form I had not expected. She did not owe me gratitude, a trophy, a film, or a lifetime of perfect behavior in exchange. I am not staying because you earned me, I said. I am staying because I am your mother, whether a judge has signed the last page yet or not. She leaned into me, and for several minutes, we stood between parked cars while footsteps and engines echoed around us. The final verification ended the following week. North Star confirmed again that I had no influence over the judging. The outside panel found no evidence that Emily had been coached, rewarded, or improperly assisted. The documentary remained eligible. Then a representative asked Emily and me to attend a confidential meeting. The woman who stayed had won the $950,000 impact grant. We were not allowed to tell anyone before the live ceremony. Emily cried without making a sound. I held her and thought of the first short film she had made from a yellow line beneath a bedroom door. The grant did not belong to us as personal money. It would fund completion, educational screenings, and a storytelling program for children living with relatives. Still, it meant the world was about to hear her. Rebecca learned only that the film remained in the final round. My mother called the night before the ceremony and admitted she had given Rebecca one of the family's guest tickets. She said Rebecca had promised she only wanted to support Emily. I did not believe her. When we entered the theater the next evening, cameras were already moving across the audience. Emily walked beside me in a dark blue dress, breathing slowly as she had practiced. Then I saw Rebecca. She was seated on the aisle, beside the reporter who had interviewed her. Grant sat on her other side. My parents were directly behind them. A stack of old family photographs rested on Rebecca's lap beneath a written statement. She looked at me, smiled, and tapped the folder with one finger. She had not come to watch Emily win. She had come to reclaim motherhood in front of the cameras. Rebecca kept one hand on the folder in her lap while the lights dimmed. The reporter beside her leaned forward as though he already knew where the real story would happen. Emily noticed them too. Her fingers tightened around mine, but she did not look away. "You do not have to respond to anything she does," I whispered. Emily took a slow breath. "I know." The ceremony began with short clips from the 3 finalist documentaries. When scenes from The Woman Who Stayed appeared on the screen, the theater grew quiet. The hallway light glowed beneath a closed bedroom door. A grandmother tied a boy's shoes before sunrise. An older brother signed a school form with a hand still stained from his night shift. My shoes waited outside Emily's school in the rain. Her old blue suitcase sat under the bed. Then her voice filled the room. Some people become parents in a hospital. Others become parents in kitchens, courtrooms, school parking lots, and hallways after midnight. No one gives them a ceremony. They simply keep showing up. I heard someone behind me sniff back tears. The presenter returned to the stage and explained that the winning project would receive a $950,000 social impact grant. The money would not belong to the filmmaker personally. It would fund completion and national distribution, educational screenings, resources for kinship families, and a youth storytelling program for children living with relatives and guardians. Emily lowered her head, as if the explanation could hide how hard her heart was beating. When the presenter opened the envelope, the pause seemed to last longer than the 5 years that had brought us there. The North Star Impact documentary grant goes to The Woman Who Stayed, directed by Emily Brooks. The theater erupted. Emily covered her mouth. For 1 second, she was completely still. Then she turned toward me, and the expression on her face was the same one I had seen at her first school screening. Joy mixed with fear, as if she was waiting for someone to tell her she had taken more than she was allowed. I stood and wrapped my arms around her. "Go," I whispered. "This is yours." She walked toward the stage while the audience remained on its feet. I watched her climb the steps in the dark blue dress we had chosen together, carrying every version of herself with her. The 12-year-old, beside the suitcase. The careful guest who apologized for eating. The child who packed before court. The girl who learned to speak through a camera. Emily accepted the trophy, then waited for the applause to settle. "Thank you to the independent panel, and to every family who trusted me with their story," she began. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. "This film is not about people who rescue children in one dramatic moment. It is about the people who wake them for school the next morning. The people who learn their medications, argue about homework, save dinner when they cannot eat, and leave a light on without asking to be thanked." My vision blurred. Emily thanked the grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles, and family friends who had participated. She said the grant would allow young people in temporary care to tell their own stories, rather than remain characters in stories adults told about them. She was about to step away from the microphone when a voice rose from the aisle. "Emily!" The applause stopped unevenly. Rebecca stood with the folder against her chest. Grant remained seated beside her. My parents looked from her to the stage, but neither moved. Rebecca's voice carried across the theater. "Whatever story you have been taught to tell, I am still your mother. Blood does not disappear because of one terrible night." A camera turned toward her. The reporter beside her was already holding up his phone. I started to rise, but Emily looked at me and shook her head. She returned to the microphone. "You keep calling it one terrible night," she said. "But it was never only one night." Rebecca's face tightened. "It was the morning after you put my suitcase outside, when you did not call to ask whether I had slept. It was the birthday cards that arrived before court hearings and the months of silence after them. It was every Christmas you posted photographs of your complete family, while I wondered whether a judge would send me back to a house that had no room for me." "Emily, this is not the place," Rebecca said. Emily continued. "It was every visit you requested and canceled. Every hearing where you brought photographs to prove you knew me, then left without asking what I was afraid of. It was every time you asked for my grades, my awards, and my pictures, but never asked whether I still slept with a suitcase packed." My mother covered her mouth. Frank stared at the floor. Emily looked directly at them. "It was also every person who told me blood made her my mother, while Aunt Laura did everything a mother was supposed to do. You protected the word. She protected me." Rebecca took one step toward the aisle. "Please stop." Emily's voice did not rise. "You had 5 years to speak. Tonight, you are going to listen." No one moved after that. Emily turned away from Rebecca and looked at me. "She never promised the court would let me stay," she said. "She never lied just to make me feel safe. She promised that whatever happened, I would not face it alone." My hands began to shake. "She sat outside my door when I could not let anyone inside. She cleared half her closet and waited while I used one shelf. She came to school concerts after working all night. She made terrible braids, took away my phone when I deserved it, apologized when she was wrong, and stayed in the room when I said things meant to hurt her." A soft laugh moved through the audience, followed by silence again. "She never asked me to be grateful. She never made me earn breakfast, a bedroom, or another day in her house. She gave me rules because she expected me to have a future. She gave me ordinary mornings, until ordinary stopped feeling temporary." Emily looked back at Rebecca. "You are the woman who gave birth to me. I will never deny that. Maybe one day I will forgive you. But forgiveness cannot return a name you abandoned." Rebecca's lips parted, but nothing came out. Emily turned toward me again. "She is my birth mother. You are my only mom." The words struck somewhere deeper than sound. For years, I had been afraid to claim a place that I thought belonged to someone else. Emily had understood before I did that motherhood was not an object one woman could steal from another. It was a life built between us. She stepped away from the microphone and came down the stairs. When she reached me, she placed the trophy in my hands. "This belongs to you," she said. I shook my head. "Sweetheart, this is your award." Emily closed my fingers around the base. "This award is for the woman who stayed when I was frightened, difficult, inconvenient, and had nothing to give her in return. I may have been born to another woman, but the only real mom I have ever known is you." She put both arms around me. For one suspended moment, the theater was completely silent. Then a woman in the front row stood. Another person rose behind her. Within seconds, the entire audience was on its feet. The applause rolled over us, but Emily held on as if we were still alone in our hallway. Over her shoulder, I saw Rebecca return slowly to her seat. The statement she had prepared remained trapped inside the folder on her lap. The reporter beside her lowered his phone. Grant did not reach for her hand. My mother was crying. My father could not look at the stage. None of them had an answer because Emily had not insulted them. She had only named what they had done and what they had refused to do. Under the lights, she had chosen her mother. At 6:12 the next morning, I woke on the couch with Emily asleep upstairs and the trophy resting beside her bed. My phone showed 47 missed calls. Most were from reporters, relatives, and North Star's legal department. The final voicemail came from Rebecca. Her voice was calm again. Tell the board Emily chose to leave. Tell them the film dramatized one argument. Do that, and I'll sign the adoption papers by Friday. Rebecca's voicemail gave me exactly what I had wanted for 5 years. It also demanded the one thing I could no longer give her. I listened once more, then called my attorney instead of calling my sister. Every offer goes in writing, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Do you intend to negotiate? I intend to know what she is really offering. Emily came downstairs while I was still on the phone. She had changed out of her dress, but traces of stage makeup remained beneath her eyes. The trophy was tucked against her chest, as if she was afraid someone might arrive to take that too. Was that her? She asked. I nodded. I told her exactly what Rebecca wanted. I did not soften the language, or pretend the offer was less cruel, because it contained something we desperately needed. Emily sat beside me on the couch. If we say it was one argument, she will sign? That is what she claims. And then no judge could send me back? The adoption would still need court approval, but she would stop fighting it. Emily stared at the trophy. For 5 years, I had watched her measure every desire against the trouble it might cause someone else. I saw the calculation begin again. One lie in exchange for permanence. One public retreat in exchange for an empty suitcase. I could say it, she whispered. No. Her head lifted. I made the film. I can say I remembered it wrong. You did not. But if it gets me out of court before I turn 18, maybe it is worth it. I took her hand. A home that requires you to deny why you needed it is not safety. Her fingers tightened around mine. What if this is our only chance? Then we will lose this chance without losing the truth. Rebecca's attorney sent the proposed agreement 2 days later. It was 9 pages long. The language was polished, restrained, and far colder than the voicemail. I would issue a statement saying Emily had voluntarily requested temporary placement with me. Emily would acknowledge that the documentary had dramatized an emotionally charged family disagreement. North Star would be asked to remove any references to abandonment from promotional materials. We would withdraw all requests to enforce unpaid support. Emily would waive any complaint regarding the use of her history in Rebecca's professional materials. In return, Rebecca would stop contesting my adoption petition. The document never said Rebecca wanted Emily home. It never required counseling, visits, or reunification. She was willing to let me become Emily's legal mother, as long as we helped her continue pretending she had never stopped being one. My attorney tapped the final page. She believes you are desperate enough to sign. She is right about the desperate part. I looked through the glass wall of the conference room. Emily sat in the waiting area with Maria, turning the trophy slowly between her hands. But she is wrong about what desperation will make me do. We sent the agreement through the proper channels. It went to the family court Maria, North Star's independent reviewers, and the ethics board at New Beginnings. I did not give it to the reporter who left 4 messages that afternoon. I did not post it online, though strangers were still arguing about Rebecca beneath clips from the ceremony. I did not need the public to punish my sister. I needed the people who had accepted her words as evidence to see what she had finally put in writing. North Star concluded that neither Emily nor I had violated the grant process. The documentary remained funded, and I was cleared to return to work. My position felt different when I walked back into the building. Some colleagues hugged me. Others avoided my eyes because they had believed Rebecca before the investigation was complete. New Beginnings took longer. Its board reviewed Rebecca's training slides, grant applications, consent records, and the agreement she had offered us. The official notice came 1 week before the final family court hearing. Rebecca had been removed from her leadership position for false reporting, misuse of a minor's personal history, and violations of the organization's ethical standards. The statement did not mention the applause at the theater or the criticism online. She lost the position because the records proved what she had done. Daniel's situation unraveled more quietly. His payment history showed long periods when he had ignored the support order. His phone records showed almost no meaningful contact with Emily. Maria asked him to explain why he had signed an affidavit, claiming Emily voluntarily chose to live with me when he had not spoken to her about where she wanted to live. He said he had trusted Rebecca. The court's attorney asked why he had trusted Rebecca's account while refusing to provide a home himself. Daniel had no answer. That did not sound like what it was. Convenience. The final hearing took place in a smaller courtroom than I expected. There were no cameras and no audience waiting to applaud. Only the people whose choices had brought Emily there. Rebecca sat beside her attorney. Grant was behind her, but his chair seemed farther away than it had at the award ceremony. Daniel appeared by video. Maria sat near Emily and me with a folder on her lap. The judge reviewed the history without drama. Rebecca's words on the night Emily left were only one part of the record. The court considered the years that followed, the visits she requested and canceled, the counseling plans she did not complete, the calls timed around reviews, the support she failed to provide consistently, the professional materials in which she transformed Emily's recovery into proof of her own method. The written bargain lay on top of the evidence. Rebecca's attorney argued that the agreement had been an attempt to end conflict and protect Emily from further publicity. The judge looked at Rebecca. If your intention was reunification, why were you willing to permit the adoption in exchange for a public statement? Rebecca began with the explanations I had heard for years. The divorce had been difficult. Grant's children needed stability. Emily had been angry. I had encouraged resistance. The film had made private reconciliation impossible. Then she looked across the courtroom. Emily was holding my hand. Rebecca's voice weakened. No one made me say there was no room for her, she said. Grant shifted behind her. Rebecca kept her eyes on Emily. I chose the life that was easier. The room remained silent. Her attorney touched her arm, but Rebecca continued. I kept fighting the adoption because signing made what I did feel permanent. I told myself that keeping my rights meant I had not abandoned her. She looked down at the agreement. But I was willing to give those rights away if Laura helped me protect my name. I cannot call that love. Rebecca withdrew her opposition. It did not erase the record, and it did not prevent the court from making findings about the years before that moment. Her honesty came after she had exhausted every way to control the outcome. Daniel did not offer the same honesty. He repeated that his household had not been prepared, and that he believed Emily had been safe with me. The judge replied that knowing a child was safe with someone else did not excuse abandoning responsibility for her. When the court addressed Emily, Maria moved her chair slightly so she could face the judge without looking past either biological parent. You understand that adoption is permanent? The judge asked. Yes. You understand that it will legally end your parents' rights and make Laura your parent? Emily nodded. And what do you want? She glanced at me. 5 years earlier, she had looked at me before answering Maria because she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. This time, she was not asking permission. I have spent 5 years being told where I might have to go, she said. I want the law to recognize the home I already chose. The judge terminated Daniel's parental rights based on his failure to maintain meaningful contact and fulfill his obligations. Rebecca's rights were terminated after the court considered the abandonment, failed reunification efforts, manipulation of the guardianship process, and her use of parental authority as leverage. The unpaid support ordered during the guardianship remained enforceable. It was responsibility owed to Emily, not a price anyone could pay to repair the relationship. Then the judge approved the adoption and signed the final order. The sound of the pen, moving across the paper, was almost too small for a moment that changed the rest of our lives. Emily looked at the signed order. then at me. "Can I call you Mom here now?" My throat closed. "You could have called me that anywhere." She shook her head, tears slipping down her face. I needed to know no one could take it away. We did not celebrate the adoption with balloons, photographers, or a crowded restaurant. Emily said she had spent enough of her life being watched, while adults decided what she was allowed to feel. She wanted dinner at home, so I made the grilled cheese sandwiches we had eaten on our first Friday night together. Maria brought a chocolate cake. 2 of my closest friends came with flowers and a frame for the adoption order. My parents were there too, but only because Emily had agreed. Eleanor and Frank had apologized several weeks earlier. They did not ask Emily to forgive them or explain that they had been trying to keep the family together. My mother simply said they had protected Rebecca's reputation because it was easier than admitting what their granddaughter had endured. My father said, "We kept asking you to be quiet because your pain made the rest of us uncomfortable." Emily listened, without comforting either of them. "You can come to dinner," she said. "That does not mean everything is fixed." They accepted that. For most of the evening, we avoided the courtroom. We argued about whether the cake had too much frosting. Maria told Emily that she had never seen anyone correct a judge's pronunciation of a documentary title with such confidence. Emily reminded her that she had spent years correcting adults who thought temporary meant harmless. After everyone left, I carried the empty plates into the kitchen. When I returned to the hallway, the light outside Emily's room was off. I stopped and smiled. She had not asked me to leave it on in months, but I still checked it every night out of habit. Her bedroom door was open. The old blue suitcase sat on top of her bed. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. My chest tightened. For one terrible second, I saw the 12-year-old girl beside Rebecca's driveway and the 17-year-old girl repacking before court. Emily looked over her shoulder. "Mom, I'm not leaving. I'm unpacking the last thing." She opened the suitcase. The clothes had been removed. What remained was the history she had never known where else to put. The first temporary caregiver form, voluntary therapeutic separation. Beside it was the original guardianship order, folded so many times that the paper had begun to split along the creases. There were birthday cards Rebecca had sent before hearings, a sweater from the house Emily had left, and several photographs from before the divorce. The newest item was a sealed letter. Rebecca's handwriting appeared on the envelope. She had written only Emily's name. There was no demand, no return date, and no word like daughter beneath it. Emily placed the adoption order inside a clean folder on her desk. "You are not putting that in the suitcase?" I asked. "No." "Why not?" "Because this is not an emergency paper." She ran one finger over the edge of the folder. "It belongs with the things I keep." I sat beside her. "What do you want to do with the rest?" "I don't know yet." She picked up the unsigned form and read the sentence one last time. Then she tore it cleanly down the middle. She did not tear the cards, the photographs, or Rebecca's letter. That mattered. She was not pretending the past had never happened. She was deciding which parts of it could still control her. Rebecca's first public statement appeared 3 days later. It was brief and without photographs. She corrected the claim she had repeated for years. Emily had not voluntarily requested separation. Rebecca had told her there was no room for her in the new family and had allowed Laura to assume every responsibility that followed. She did not blame Grant, the divorce, or Emily's behavior. New Beginnings confirmed that Rebecca had written to its board accepting responsibility for the false case study. She did not ask for her position back. The support arrears were placed on a payment schedule. The first payment arrived without a note. I deposited it into the account established for Emily's education and therapy, exactly where the earlier court order required it to go. Money did not change what Rebecca had done. It only proved that responsibility could continue after excuses stopped. Over the next year, letters arrived every few months. Rebecca never asked why Emily had not answered. She did not send gifts. She did not sign the envelope's mom or remind Emily of their blood relationship. In the first letter, she wrote that she had begun therapy. In the second, she admitted she had kept her parental rights, because losing them would have forced her to accept how completely she had failed. In the third, she wrote that she understood Laura was Emily's mother, and that respecting that truth was not a punishment. It was part of loving Emily without trying to possess her. Emily read none of them at first. She kept the envelopes inside a desk drawer, instead of the suitcase. Daniel sent one message after learning that his rights had been terminated. He said he hoped Emily understood that he had always believed she was safe with me. Emily read it once. "He still thinks knowing I was safe somewhere else made him a father," she said. She did not reply. Daniel remained mostly absent. His wife and children eventually learned more about the case, but no sudden visit followed. No one forced Emily into reconciliation, simply because he shared her blood. The difference between Daniel and Rebecca became clear over time. Both had lost the right to decide her life. Only one began accepting that remorse required action. Almost 15 months after the adoption, Emily asked whether I would accompany her to meet Rebecca. The meeting took place in a public garden near the river. It was early spring, and the first flowers had begun appearing beneath the trees. Rebecca was already waiting on a bench when we arrived. She looked thinner and older, but she did not use that appearance to ask for sympathy. Emily sat beside me. Rebecca remained across from us. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Rebecca said, "I gave birth to you. Laura raised you. I spent years believing those facts competed with each other. They do not." Emily watched her carefully. Rebecca continued, "I lost the right to ask you for anything. I am not here to ask you to call me Mom, forgive me, or protect me from what people think." Her hands remained folded in her lap. "I only wanted to say the truth while you were in the room. You did not choose to leave. I chose a life that excluded you. Laura did not take you from me. She stayed when I did not." Emily's expression did not soften immediately. "I may forgive you one day," she said, "but I already have a mother." Rebecca looked at me, then back at Emily. "I know. Loving you now means respecting that." The meeting lasted less than 20 minutes. There was no embrace. Rebecca did not ask when they could meet again. When Emily stood, Rebecca remained on the bench and allowed her to leave without turning the moment into another promise. It did not restore a family. It opened the possibility that one day, Emily might know Rebecca as a flawed woman who had finally stopped calling control love. By then, the woman who stayed had begun screening in schools, libraries, and kinship support centers. The grant funded a youth storytelling program where children living with relatives could make short films about their own lives. The money did not buy us a bigger house. It did not erase legal fees or return the years I had spent afraid of losing Emily. It gave other children a camera and the right to speak before adults wrote their stories for them. On the afternoon of the program's first local workshop, Emily carried the blue suitcase into a family resource center. A little girl near the reception desk watched it closely. She was about 9 and stood beside an older woman who looked exhausted. Their belongings were stuffed into plastic shopping bags. Emily knelt and opened the suitcase. Before handing it over, she removed Rebecca's most recent letter and slipped it into her shoulder bag. "You are keeping that one?" I asked. "I might read it someday." She closed the empty suitcase. The little girl touched the handle, as though she was unsure she was allowed to take it. Emily showed her how the zipper worked and told her the front pocket was good for things she did not want to lose. When we walked back outside, the evening light stretched across the parking lot. I looked at Emily's empty hands. "Are you sure?" I asked. She took my hand. "I don't need a bag ready by the door anymore." We reached the car, but she did not let go. "Come on, Mom. Let's go home." For 5 years, Emily had slept ready to leave. That evening, she walked beside me with empty hands, because home was no longer the place a judge might let her keep. It was the place we had chosen, day after day, until no one could take it from us.